Good morning, everybody. It is Data Day, my favorite day of the week. I know everybody is anticipated for it. We want to welcome you to Sales Chatter, the logistics podcast, where we aim to help 10,000 reps hit a million GP. I'm your co-host, Ryan Mohammed. With me is my main man, the bodacious cowboy, president and CEO of RGTX Logistics Solutions, Jeff Dickinson. How's it going this morning, my man?
Great. I can't believe it's hump day already. I mean, this week has flown by. I say it every day, and I guess it's because we're so busy that time is just not there. So with that said, let's get into my favorite day of the week, Data Day. Let's do it.
Welcome to the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
It really is the best day of the week. So we've got a jam-packed panel, as you guys can see this morning. So first and foremost, I want to say, Dean, good morning to you, my friend. Thank you for coming on this morning. It's always great to see you. Hopefully the Grumpy Pete is doing well as well. And we've got my man, Mike Langstaff. Welcome to the show, brother. How you doing this morning?
Welcome. Thank you. Good morning, guys. How are you?
Awesome,
Things are good. Like Jeff mentioned earlier, hump day.
Okay, there we go. So we're all ready for it. I might give the audience a little introduction, a little promo for yourself about yourself.
Promo. Well, let's see. I've been in the transportation industry I'm really aging myself now. I started when I was 10. 36 years I've been in the industry, so that only makes me 46. Is that right? I'm from Montreal originally. Pardon?
I haven't aged a bit.
No, I didn't think so. Just a little whiter around the beard. The industry, how it goes up and down. I'm basically a sales agent for a fairly big company that group. The Ryan, you know them. Been there for 4 years. Probably best company I've worked for, and I've worked for many. Do as they say as they do. And, you talk about you want to get everybody to $1 million GP. I'll help if necessary. Anyways, guys, that's it. I do cross-border, vice president, corporate accounts. I handle mainly large accounts across North America, make sure that they get the service and deliver the goods on time.
Awesome. What company is that, Mike?
It's a Wellington group of companies, awesome. Wellington Motor Freight. Canadian based. We're also in the US as well. We have our own assets, warehousing, supply chain, and we've done well. So I started back with those guys in 2019, and now we've pretty much quadrupled in sales.
So people first all the time. So
young guys.
Really happy to have you here, Mike. It's awesome.
Thank you.
It's going to be a great episode to hear. So, Dean, like we said, good morning to you. We caught the DAT IQ show yesterday, and I was reading your blog posts that came out. So it was amazing. We'll get to that in the show. You told us that January imports, they're in. Let's roll with it,
I think I beat Mike by a year. My dad made me start driving trucks at 9. So,
wow, you got me beat.
1 year.
All right.
He didn't have to make me like all that much. I think I was in the seat before he even suggested it. But it's a great industry. Love being in it.
It is,
so,
absolutely.
Absolutely. I started at 5 driving a workhorse. Jockeying around trailers. So
right. Yeah.
Wow.
I sat on my 1-year-old brother at age 3 as a pillow and drove our automatic cars through the garage wall at age 3. As we said on the show, in Australia, my mum and dad were less worried about snakes and spiders, but where were the keys to the tractor? That was the big deal.
Yeah, it's quite the industry.
Yeah. When people say it's in your blood, it's like it's hard to describe because it's everywhere you go, there's freight moving and trucks moving, and logistics is such a fascinating industry. A couple of things. I just listened to the podcast on Freightvine with Professor Kaplis from MIT and Ari Ash from the Journal of Commerce, where he talked about imports, drayage, chassis, got to get the American English, chassis trailers. And he talked about this imaginary line between whether it's cheaper to go into, it's shorter to move freight from Asia to the West Coast and then inland to, say, Chicago or Kansas City, as opposed to coming from Asia through the Panama Canal up to the Gulf Coast or the East Coast. And he said there's an imaginary line where it's cheaper to move freight to the West Coast and the East Coast. And in his mind, he drew it from Chicago to New Orleans. So he said, if you draw an imaginary line, west of that, it's probably more economical to go to the West Coast and move it inland. East of that, it's more economical to go to the East Coast to move it inland up and down the coast. And if you go to the East Coast, you may dray it in an FEU or a TEU, or you might transload it into a 53-foot van. So I thought it's a really good listen if you want to listen to, a good perspective on the inland side of moving international freight. It's a really good listen. I'm going to do a write-up on it this week because I learned a few things that I didn't fully understand about, who owns chassis trailers. And the real issue is not domestic chassis trailers that JB Hunt and Hub and Schneider own. It's the international containers that where the supply is dictated by the ocean carriers, which impacts what chassis trailers are, carrier hauls. Yeah. I'd never really understood the difference in those two. But the coastal shift that we talked about with imports is still underway. The latest data for January from IHS Markit, I just pulled it down this morning. The East Coast still has the majority of the freight volume. Historically, it's always been the West Coast. Yep. And but the numbers are reversed. So the total number of containers coming in January, 47% share to East Coast, 41% share to the West Coast. East Coast numbers everybody's volumes are down, right? So volumes have dropped about 25% since August. There's been a precipitous fall in import volumes since August. The rate of decline of imports out of Southern Asia to the East Coast is falling lower. But if I give you some year-over-year numbers to give you a sense of the shift in freight from the West Coast to the East Coast volumes are down 11% year-over-year. West Coast volumes are down double that at 24% year-over-year.
Wow.
So, volumes are dropping. And, of course, on the West Coast, we've still got the ILWU agreement that is still not in place. Shippers are now, as we talked last week, into that process where they're routing their imports from Asia to the US for the spring and summer, and then we get into the retail season. Of course, they're looking at routings to avoid congestion and delays. The delays could possibly be on the West Coast where that agreement is still to be ratified, even though they're talking about getting back to negotiating. So I think that could. Gene Soroka, the head of the Port of Los Angeles, said last week, "Don't bet against LA," was the headline. And I thought, wow, you guys have lost so much volume because of that congestion, which largely wasn't your doing, right? But then on top of that, there was the lack of negotiation between the unions. And I think that spooked a lot of shippers. So we've seen this shift in freight to the East Coast. Gulf Coast volumes were up 21% last month, only down 10% year over year. So, and we've always talked about this show about that shift. Volumes out of Houston up 28% month over month. Wow. So that's probably one. If I look at all the top ports, Houston is one of the stars, still one of the stars. Baltimore was the other one that really jumped out at me. Most of the other ports are down, right, in terms of month over month changes, but volumes are still coming into Houston. Volumes are up 27%. Baltimore was the real bolter there. Volumes are up, and again, it's just outside the top 10. Volumes are up 26% month over month, but there was a massive increase in products called plasticizers and vinyl, alcohol, and PVC resins. So those two things were almost non-existent in the data a year ago, but they have overwhelmed the import, commodity makeup just recently. So I don't know whether they're ISO tankers or what I haven't got to the bottom of that, but that's sort of what it looks like right now. Total volumes, if you look at the entire US market, volumes were up 5% in January. So that's important to remember. After dropping 25% since August, they were up in December, up from December to January, but nationally still down about 17% year over year. And of course, we're coming off some fairly aggressive comps, right, where we're comparing to January last year, which was when we had 109 vessels at port at anchor trying to get unloaded. That was peak congestion.
Yeah.
But the number that we're still seeing about 2 million 20-foot equivalent units coming into the country. And as we've discussed on the show, 2 million is about that threshold where the supply chain works pretty smoothly. And we can quote the head of Georgia Ports, where he said that anything over that consistently, we get into trouble. We're just coming out of a period of 28 months of being in excess of 2 million TEU a month. I think it got to about 2.6 million TEU a month April, May last year or thereabouts. So we're kind of returning back to 2019 levels. So things are calming down a bit on the ocean front, but this is the quiet time because of Chinese New Year. So I expect February will be down. So I think we'll see that come down, and then volumes will start to pick up again. So that's where we're at on the import front. On the commodity level, just to wrap up quickly, furniture is still the number one commodity that we bring into the country, followed by plastic products, toys. But I looked across the board at the top 20 commodities. Every commodity was down. So furniture imports, because of the pandemic, we were building decks and buying, office computers and chairs and things. So we were doing a lot of things with, remodeling and repairing homes. Volumes of furniture are down 31% year over year. Toys are down 36%. Women's clothing down 19%, sheets and towels down 23%. A lot of retail products that we've been buying through e-commerce are down. The only two products that were positive in the top 20 were auto parts, up 4%, and a really strange one, bags and bags. I don't know what bags mean, up 1%. So, but for the most part, all of those things that we've been buying during the pandemic, all of those volumes are starting to fall off in line with overall volumes decreasing. There is still a shift in imports from Southeast Asia. So if you think about Southeast Asia, Vietnam, there is a shift away from Northeast Asia, which is, of course, China. There's less volume coming out of China, but more volume so it's an increasing volume out of Southeast Asia, which, of course, is heading west through the Suez Canal to the East Coast. And that shift, it looks like, being sustained for those that think about, organising trucks and carriers and loads and logistics on the East Coast. So we're looking at, I think that trend will continue while ever, in particular, the ILWU agreement is not ratified on the West Coast. That will still cause shippers, I think, to reroute their freight to ports not called Los Angeles and Long Beach. Unfortunately for those guys, I think it's going to be a tough year for the West Coast port carriers. So and that, of course, that data comes from IHS Market, and that's sort of the 2023 summary for imports. We've got exports coming out next month too, so we'll have 2022 export data available in the coming weeks.
Hey, Dean, do you have any numbers on the returns yet? And when you mention retail, it's funny because we get a lot of flyers at the house, and they're showing like Talbots for one, 70% off. Do you feel, and I think, based upon the inventory levels, that there's not enough room to pull in extra inventory? So why bring that inventory in when they have to get rid of the inventory they have on hand? And that's why you're seeing all these high increases in discounts, 70%, 60%, to try to move that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's happening. Absolutely. I think people have been, I think there was a story out today on the Journal of Commerce talking about that exact thing, where retailers have been discounting a lot of that inventory. I go back to what we talked about on the show last week with David Jackson, CEO of Knight Swift. What he said at the Stifel conference last week was that he expects that all of those inventories will return to normal by the middle of the year. So all those inventories will be drawn down, whether it's and you mentioned returns. I think the big thing that's changed this year is returns have been stymied somewhat by all the fees that have been imposed by retailers. So there was a headline in Digital Commerce yesterday that about 60% of retailers changed their return policies by adding in fees. So I think that's crimped a lot of the typical volume that we see on the return front. But
Yeah,
I haven't seen the final numbers on what return season looks like, and I'm not sure how to get that.
Something to your point regarding that, we'll start seeing that depleting until like midsummer or somewhere around there. Where do you think? I mean, just logically, I would think there would be an uptick on imports coming in because depleting the inventory. Now they have to boost that inventory up.
Right.
So I would think that you should see a pretty good climb starting around that maybe June. Maybe June, July, somewhere in that area.
The National Retail Federation pegged it at about 18%. The amount of merchandise that will be returned as a result of shopping during the 2022 season. It's about 171 billion in goods. They said it's about 1%. That's about 1% higher than what it would normally be throughout the year. So the National Retail Federation is probably the go-to source on that number, but I don't know. I'm just doing a quick search here now. I haven't seen any final numbers from them on this season. It's generally pretty lag data by the time they get it all together. So it's probably a topic we need to chase down at some point, Jeff.
Yeah, that's a great point that you both mentioned, because like even for us, like my wife and I, we were shopping and we got an elliptical that's normally like $500 for like $100 at Walmart. We're like, why not?
Really?
Why not take the chance at it? Because, but you look at this, I compare it to like during COVID, you couldn't find dumbbells anywhere, you couldn't find yoga mats anywhere, you couldn't find these things, and they were at a premium. Mike, you I know that definitely COVID with the retail, it's affected your business as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. But mind you, in 2022, probably the best year ever.
Right.
It depends on, I guess, the industry that you're, like I try and diversify with my customers. Food was up because more people were staying home and eating at home and not going out to restaurants. Automotive was down a little bit because, where are you going to drive? Just drive around. You couldn't go anywhere, especially in Canada. We were a lot stricter than the US as far as staying home.
Right.
But as far as like you mentioned about the dumbbells and workout equipment, people wanted to shed off all that food that we were staying home and eating, watching TV.
Right. But I went to Home Depot on the weekend. We've had builders in here, and somehow one of my DeWalt hammer drills grew legs, and
I like that one. Grew legs.
Talk about God, I was annoyed because I just bought this 2-pack, right, and all the batteries, and I was set to do all these renovations and stuff anyway, so my drills vanished. So I thought I'll just whip down to Home Depot and get another one because they should be on special. Well, not only weren't they on special, the wall full of DeWalt drills they'd had were gone. Yeah. Because to your point, Jeff, they were heavily discounting all of this inventory they had. And as I walked around the store, I'd ask these guys, where's this, where's that? And it was like a simple 4-gang light switch that I wanted for a new light cover we'd put in. Yeah, it's only available online and it's out of stock. Like everything I asked for was out of stock. And I thought, okay, so this is the end result of all of that excess discounting and all of that excess inventory. But the DeWalt drills, and I remember seeing it. There was the whole front wall behind the cash registers was like a 15-foot display of DeWalt drills in all these cages. So they had a lot of inventory. I think they'd over ordered and then moved it all to the point where they had nothing left. Couldn't even buy a drill for $99.
You know something, Dean? Talking about the automotive, when I was working for Ford, running the PDC there, we could gauge as far as VOR, vehicle off the road, and that was based upon parts breaking down, etc., and replacing them. With the pandemic and people being home and not being in the office and taking mass transit, I wonder what kind of impact it had on auto parts. The auto zones and the Best Boys and all of that out there. How much of an increase? I'm going to assume that there was an increase in auto parts for that simple reason, and of course that would put a lot of pressure on the on the transportation. More trucks, more loads, etc. Do you have any numbers on that? I know we didn't talk about it, so I'm not going to expect you having it, but I was just wondering.
I don't. Yeah, I don't. But I think anecdotally, you're 100% right because we've just seen a massive drawdown of inventory in a lot of areas, but I still can't get parts for my Peterbilt, parts that I would normally just be able to go to a truck line nearby and buy. They've still got shortage issues.
And you think
so
about
I think
that too. You think about that too, Dean. We had the problems of getting the chips. Remember?
They're shoring and stuff.
All of this. How about the other parts that were coming in from Asia and all of that, right?
Right.
And now you have an uptick of people driving their cars more than what they would during the week. That puts a lot more pressure on it, logically thinking. So that's why I'm asking that question. What, how much of an increase it had to? I mean, just logically, it had to go up quite a bit.
Yeah, I don't know. There's probably some, I don't know, they're the auto parts folks, public companies. We'd probably have some earnings calls we could dig into. I've never looked at that, so that's a good question. Yeah. But I will say that, we had, so we've just done some repair and remodeling. And remember on our show last week, we talked about our guest we had, Dustin Jalbert from Fast Markets. He said that 30 to 40% of, lumber demand was repair and remodeling in homes. Well, we've just gone through a renovation here in this house we've bought. And so 9 months ago, we ordered windows. And we had the windows installed just before Christmas. Fly screens turned up last week, and we're still waiting on another fly screen that may come in the next week or so. So there's still shortages of, and the input components is the mesh that they're having trouble getting. On our kitchen side, same thing with the kitchen. We still are waiting on. We must have had 4 or 5 different, sequential deliveries of different, panels, doors. The doors turn up without the router hole drilled for the hinge, little things like that. And we talked we talked to the designer and said, well, what's up with that? That's pretty basic stuff. People, they can't get staff. So this is still going on, where there is a staffing shortage. There are still componentry shortages that's still impacting the supply chain. But I think, anecdotally, it's just getting easier. Like it's smoothing out, but it's still persisting.
And that's why this show is so important, because as you know, I always look in logistics about the what if scenarios, and what I just said about the auto parts being out there. It's about ramping up and thinking about the what ifs and how are you going to respond to this if you know that the data is there and it's going to come down. How do you ramp up and prepare yourself for the extra capacity? The extra people to handle that onslaught, because it's going to come. You don't know when, and you're trying to, funnel that down to a specific time. When is this going to happen, and how am I going to respond to that increase when it does happen? And that's what I like about this show. This is my favorite day of the week, because you're able to tell.
It is interesting.
Yeah, you're able to tell the people out there that this is what's happening. There's a huge change. What are you going to do about it to prepare yourself for your customers and your prospects? So it's good stuff. Good stuff.
We just had a data point out today too, which is probably worth covering on that point, Jeff. If you think about truckload demand, the data point that I follow probably the most closely is the Michigan State University Truckload Ton Mile Index, based on 41 freight producing commodities. Professor Jason Miller is the go-to guy to follow on LinkedIn if you're not already. But he was on our show a few months ago, and he said that he expects December volumes to be flat to down. They were down just under 1% month over month in December, down 2% from the March 2022 peak, again, which makes sense. And even, I thought this is the most important data point, December volumes in 2022 were even with December 2021 volumes. So they were flat year over year, which I think is, there's still consistent truckload volumes in the market, but he's becoming less optimistic, I think would be the right term, about what 2023 looks like, basically because of the industrial economy. He said his closing point in his LinkedIn post today was a lot of the fortunes of the trucking industry will hinge upon housing starts, which are out tomorrow for January's housing starts and permits. A lot of our freight volume for dry vans and flatbeds, of course, are tied to housing, mostly single family housing. But that's why I mentioned imports of furniture at 13% of all containers. It's double the next nearest commodity we import. So furniture imports are by far the biggest thing that come into this country. So when you think about imports are down 25%, furniture imports are down like 30% year over year. And that's putting a big drag on truckload volumes, because those import containers come in. You'll have a 40-foot container full of washing machines. It goes into a warehouse and then it'll go out on trucks all over the country. So it's not just, the building of houses, it's the fitting out of houses that will impact. So tomorrow's numbers we'll talk about on the show next week. Tomorrow's single family housing starts numbers will be really, really important. Last month there was a slight pause in the decrease. I think that's a nice way to sugarcoat this, but there was some more optimism by builders in the market that things may be turning around as interest rates ease. So we'll know more tomorrow on that, but that's a data point we need to watch when we think about capacity, truckload demand. Capacity is still leaving the industry, but I will note with a little bit of optimism that we were losing. If you think about the net adds and subtractions of truckload carriers in the interstate sector, we started losing carriers at about the rate of 2,000 carriers a month in October and November, flatlined in December. So far this month, we've only lost 800. So it's turning back towards break even, because you've always got carriers coming and going in the industry. Contract rates are still high. I think it's very attractive for people still to buy a truck and go and lease on to a large carrier. So, the rates are still attractive. Obviously, they get a fairly heavy fuel discount on those buying programs with the large fleet. Spot rates are still, they're bottoming out, but they're not terribly low, like compared to prior years. So there's still some value there for carriers. So it looks like we're at the bottom of that market, but we're still, this is a really pivotal time for us all in terms of understanding where this market cycle bottoms. Our forecasts have spot rates bottoming out. Contract rates will still follow down for a little while. But when capacity starts to become net positive, that's when we start to see this next market cycle coming up, because that should be consistent with spot rates turning back up for the positive, which again, now forecasts are showing that spring, is when that normally happens, because you see more building, more materials being built, more steel being hauled, more machineries coming in from overseas into Baltimore and Houston and Galveston. And of course, produce season then starts to drive up volumes, which is, we're starting to see Florida's produce volumes equal volumes this time last year. So it's back on track heading into May. So
that's why it's so important to follow the verticals, because one relates to the other. So you have the the housing development and seeing all these new homes come up. That there's furniture that needs to fill that room. So when you start seeing those verticals and percentages going down, there's a draw on the backside. So that's where you prepare. And then you look at who are the biggest furniture producers out there. What's the high likelihood of them increasing by 15%, because it's relative to the housing market, right? So you prepare yourself and you start talking to your carriers, and they're like, hey, I'm going to need more capacity here. This is what the market's doing. Can you do it? So that's why no matter what niche you're in, it's so important to follow those markets, because it's going to tell you where you need to be.
And on our show last week, Dustin said that we've still got a record number of houses under construction. So there's not just the houses that are starting each month and permits that are being applied for, which tell you about who's going to break ground in the next couple of months. It's the houses under construction that are taking longer. Yeah. He sort of used a number. I think it was like, if it would take you normally 6 months to build a house, it's now 10. So it's taking longer to build those houses because of those supply chain disruptions that we've all, just been talking about in different areas.
Yeah, well, we see that in our area like a lot right now. Like houses are half built right now, and they're just waiting for it to kind of thaw out and things like that. And one of the kind of jokes that I was talking with a real estate agent friend of mine is that a lot of these new builders, they don't have the capital to actually go and build the houses. So they're taking those deposits. They're asking for maybe like 15, 20, like you got to pay like, I think like 200 grand within 90 days, just to not even just to have the shell of the house. And they're kind of looking at that, kind of building there. And I'm interested to kind of see, I actually want to get Mike's opinion on it as well, because I know his wife is actually in the real estate game as well, and understanding like what's going on. Mike just recently moved into a home as well, and we had the boom. I think right now it's kind of plateauing a little bit, but it's going to start booming again as we start increasing the population.
From what she said, there's not a lot of inventory out, so basically it's driving back up the prices of homes. There's a lot of bidding wars. But it's funny with the interest rates being so high. it's actually starting to move the scale upward again. And she's working all the time showing houses. But yeah, there's not a lot of houses available. And now with the kick with in Ontario, they want to push for, more affordable homes. And wood, for an example. I built a rink there when I came in. Now it's a swimming pool, but to find wood and the cost of wood, it's really expensive. I bought 4x8 plywood for the boards, and it was like almost $60 a sheet. That's unheard of,
Wow.
and go and look at Dean, when you were mentioning of inventory, the inventory is way down for wood,
exactly.
So that slows the whole process down for the housing industry. And that's why you see a lot of shells or, it's not completed. That's probably one of the reasons. But the real estate agent, the real estate market, I'm not a pro at it, but she is. And she said she's pretty busy working, but it's actually buying. But there's price wars again. 20. I sold my house in 2 days. 2 days.
Awesome.
But to negotiate this house, it took a little bit of a while. It's out in the boonies, and it's perfect. Took me 60 years, but that's okay.
I thought you were 55, I actually want to get to David's question. I saw it earlier on, and I kind of want to get everyone's kind of opinion on it, where he says, hey, he's been hearing rumors that fuel prices may go quite high this summer. Is there any data to back this up?
Probably.
Yeah, probably.
People want to get on the road. It's vacation time. That's it. They always do.
Yeah.
Every
year.
Yeah, it's a great question. Diesel, what was it, down to $4.44 national average this week? So it's down, I think, 9 cents. That's a long way south of the $5.80 a gallon national average in July of last year. One of the things I've been very concerned about is the impact of China's economy reopening and the draw on global fuel demand, or crude, because they're the largest importer of crude in the world. So when that economy, they're still coming out of 2 years of pretty heavy lockdowns, but their economy is not doing so well either. Normally they can invest their way out of the doldrums that they're typically in. I don't know that we'll see that this time around, but that's the wild card for me, is how that economy ramps up and starts to put a draw on demand. But diesel prices are coming down. Normally they do go back up in summer, so I think Damon's onto something there. I don't have any data. The guy to listen to is John Kingston, who has a podcast called Drilling Deep. He's one of Freightways' best journalists, but he'd be the one that I would listen to if you wanted to get your head around where diesel prices are headed longer term.
How much, Mike? What's the cost per liter up there?
Well, sorry guys. What happened? Oh, sorry guys.
You're here.
No, there I am. Right now, so it's approximately 4 liters for every U.S. gallon. Right now, you're looking at $1.50, I believe, $1.47. So multiply that by 4. It's well over $8 a gallon. You guys in the U.S. would go nuts. Like, if you think about it, it's double. Yeah, isn't that right, Ryan? It's about 4 liters per gallon.
Yeah, 4 liters per gallon, and I just pulled it up to. It's about 3.5, but yeah, it's looking about like 135 and so.
It's almost worth it for me to drive to Buffalo, fill up, and come back. Even with the U.S. exchange, it's still cheaper. Right. But then again, that's supply and demand, right? 300 and some odd million versus 30-something million.
Right.
Dean, our whole country's going to work on batteries soon.
We hope so. We're still waiting. Dean, you made a blog post yesterday, and the conversation I kind of want to have with you is in terms of roadworks. Can you explain to everybody in the audience in terms of how much hours are lost for truck drivers just based in congestion and sitting in traffic? Because I think that's such a big thing that we don't look at.
Wow. Yeah,
the blog post is one of the pictures. Figure 1 in my blog post is a picture I took in roadworks coming out of Atlanta recently. On 995 North, I left at like 2 p.m. I thought, this will be good. I'll be ahead of traffic. I'll get out of Atlanta. This will be, I'll be and if you're listening to my navigation device, it's saying estimated time of arrival is 21 hours into Boston. I thought, oh, piece of cake, I'll do that easily. I'll be there at 6 a.m. or something in the morning. Anyway, so I hit, we're tearing along, and this is trucks, flying everywhere, northbound and southbound. And then we hit roadworks where they're widening the I-85 from 2 lanes to 4. It added 2 hours to just getting out of Georgia alone. Wow. And what struck me was that if you look at the picture in my blog post, it's just nothing but trucks. And this went on for hours. So the congestion, because traffic has memory, right? So this bank up here would have worked its way back like a ripple all the way back into Atlanta over the course of the afternoon and evening. But this added, it was midday before I got home the next day. So it added a substantial amount of time because it threw me out of sequence in terms of where I needed to be at different waypoints along the way. So what struck me, though, was that these guys were creeping along, it was over 5 miles an hour. So that meant that their on duty was triggered, right? So if you can stay under 5 miles an hour, it stays off duty on your ELD device. So they were racking up hours. And what struck me was how much is this really impacting productivity? And then I thought if we didn't have roadworks, we'd have probably worse rates because we'd have more trucks moving at a higher velocity through the freight network. So there's good and bad with that. But the data from INRIX is a global traffic telematics company, and says that the typical driver in this country loses about 51 hours in congestion, which is, a staggering amount of time. Some of the worst cities in the world. So I think 3 of the top 5 worst cities in the world are in the US. London is obviously the worst.
New York
What's
City,
that?
New York City, number 1.
Yeah, so Chicago.
Toronto for sure.
Chicago's 155, Paris 138, Boston 134, New York's 117 hours in lost time. So these are, that's what do you got, 168 hours in a week. So there's London, you almost lose a week in terms of commute time. No surprise.
Wow, that's crazy.
I think we talked about this on Sirius XM last week, and I think the common link here is that a lot of these cities have grown, I'm going to say organically. They're not like where I'm from in Canberra in Australia, which was designed by an American architect with 100 years of growth in mind, where everything is symmetrical with rotaries and roads that radiate out. So 100 years worth of growth was planned back in the early 1900s. If you think about how Paris and Boston and Chicago have developed over time, they have a real cross section of interstate, roads and interstates, and it's hard to get around some of those cities where they haven't had necessarily the traffic growth in mind. So, a lot of hours. It's billions of dollars, Ryan, as the ATRI report will show you. But some of those corridors that are still, the worst corridor is not far from where Jeff and I are. In fact, in between Jeff and I is the worst traffic corridor for truckload carriers, and it's the I-95 through Stamford, Connecticut.
Oh, yeah.
It took the number 1 and 3 spots, I-95 north and south. I think congestion on the return trip is still as high as 30 minutes in terms of what people lose, and 34 on the northbound. And of course, I-5 in Los Angeles was, right behind that. So it's a big deal for carriers. I think it's frustrating for truck drivers, though. But I think, as I said in my article, Ryan, this is the bitter pill we all have to swallow.
Yeah, you know something, Dean? It's just like there is a specific time that truckers need to get through those pain points in order to avoid it, and that really dictates, scheduling when the receiver can take you in. If you're stuck there and you're hitting that New York on I-95 around
Fort Lee
4:30 to 6:30 in the afternoon, you're done. And forget about the LIE, right? Forget about the LIE, man. You don't want to be at that time. That's just absolutely. You might as well just park your truck in the fast lane, but you ain't going anywhere.
And that's the problem with ELDs, right? You kind of can't just sort of sit traffic out anymore. You got to sit there and just do what you can. ATRI had ATRI's report came out last week. Rebecca Brewster was on Sirius XM just after me talking about their 2022 report on the traffic bottlenecks. Not much change there. I mean, Fort Lee around I-95 there in New Jersey, number 1 still, going across the George Washington Bridge.
That's going over GW, the Frogsnet, the Whitestone,
right.
horrible stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. I've always said that the truck should have their own lanes. That would speed it up.
Right.
But that never happens, especially on the 401 going between Montreal and Toronto, which I do quite a bit. You know, there's 2 lanes, and then the trucks are side by side going 100 kilometers an hour or 55, and you know, you're frustrated because you want to pass them. But hey, we love truckers. But if they had their own lane, I think it would move quicker, and cars aren't allowed into that lane. I don't know if that's something by the future.
So that'd be interesting. Like, I could imagine me coming up behind a big fleet truck speed limited at 63, and I'm on, and I've got it. Yeah, I'm going past. They don't call it the left lane express for nothing.
No, that's true.
Well, when you guys talk about those things, I think about, like, I used to do a lot of heavy haul back in my day when I dispatched flatbed.
Right.
So you look at those situations where you have permits, you got escorts and things like that, and you can only travel at night, or you got to plan your route that there's no bridges, or your mold and everything's going down. So you only really have one choice, and if you're losing that much hours, and most of the time, whenever you're doing a heavy haul or anything like that, they need it immediately. They're not bringing that over because they've got a crane booked, they've got a crew booked. You know, it's time and everything like that. So that's what kind of brings up my mind.
You know something? The first time in the history, I just read this, and Dean will love this as well. They actually had several heavy haul down I-95 going across the George Washington Bridge, and they actually shut the roadway down for the escorts and about 12 or 15 with heavy hauls. They literally, the first time ever that they shut that road down. I mean, they were going down the middle of the road. I mean, you've been over the GW Bridge, but they shut it completely down for miles to get these guys through there. Because, I mean, just imagine these heavy haul wide loads around rush hour going over GW Bridge.
God bless.
What a nightmare.
I mean, that's just seriously. I forgot who it was, but they were big pieces. Several of them.
Hey Ryan, I just looked at quickly pulled up the ATRI research on this subject. They peg industry congestion to the truckload carrier industry at 74 billion. This was a 2018 report. I haven't seen anything since, but it was 74 billion. It said that equates to 425,000 commercial truck drivers sitting idle for a year. To put that in dollar terms, how much time they spend.
Wow.
So I think that's and there's a number of.
I love data.
Oh, you gotta love data, man.
Hey, that's unbelievable.
Well, let me ask you this, Mike.
Mike,
as your sales rep, how are you having these conversations with your customers with data like this? Because we're always intrigued. I know you watch every Wednesday.
Yeah. I'll let you know next week.
I like that answer. That's fine.
As funny and sad as this sounds, when you start throwing these numbers out, you know what they're going to say? Oh, that's bull. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's BS.
It's just so hard to comprehend that type of number. Right. You know, that people don't realize the cost that's associated with idle trucks sitting there or deadhead miles. They just don't get it.
And then the ELDs, they have to. Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, so to put this into context, when I worked for a large telematics firm, one of the things we did, my job was to monetize data, and I used to sell our telematics data to a lot of companies that would anonymize it, and then use the lat-long plots to figure out traffic congestion, black spots, in particular spots where there was a high frequency of rapid decelerations, because that would tell you then that that's a black spot, and we should warn all the other trucks coming down the interstate that that's a problem. But the data is used by companies like INRIX and ATRI to measure traffic congestion. So it's really accurate data when you start to anonymize it and look at it over a period of time. But they estimated the national average cost to a truck was about $6,500 a year was the cost. So that's 75 billion. It was equivalent to about 287 million miles. So they're the numbers. It's substantial. It's probably the only data set that really equates what it really costs to run trucks, in terms of the congestion piece. But it's good data. But I think what struck me was that if we didn't have construction season, we'd have a lot more trucks on the road looking for work. So that was what was in my mind, right? I was thinking, rates are low, but how bad would it be if we had everyone moving at 70 miles an hour with no traffic?
Yeah, that's true.
True.
Well, that's why we have like the paid highway in Toronto here. We have the 407, which is a tolled highway, and I love driving it. I don't like the cost, but I love driving it because it's just
ridiculous.
Clear
The
and
cost.
Yeah,
just going back to the fuel in the U.S. versus Canada, and then the roads in the United States, where you pay, maybe $16 from Canada going into all the way to Florida, maybe $20. Here, just like a couple of exits is $20.
Right.
There.
And you don't see a lot of trucks on the 407 either. That's the paid highway. You see a few, but you don't see a lot because, add that cost. But it is a great highway, though.
It's a great highway. Dean, is there any kind of data in regards to Valentine's Day? I know it was just yesterday in terms of like imports. Like I know we were talking about last week that for like 7 months, 500 truckloads a day by 3 carriers do like 80% of that. With all the flowers coming out of Miami.
Flowers and everything coming out of Miami.
Yeah. So, just to level set.
We didn't buy any. Sorry, Dean.
Yeah. It's about 93% of our, roses and carnations come out of Ecuador and Colombia into Miami. So it's one of those freight events that moves the needle, but not nationally. Rates went down nationally, but they did go up out of Miami northbound by about 26 cents a mile. It's a pretty big jump. Rates have been fairly unattractive for a while for carriers, but they hit $1.66 a mile last week, up 26 cents. That's for reefer carriers northbound. It was our top reefer market last week for load posts, and normally we don't see that. Brooklyn, Hunts Point, New York, the biggest produce market in the country, just under $2 a mile. So that's excluding fuel. You've got to add fuel to that to get what a contract rate would be. But rates are pretty good out of there. They will back off a little bit now before produce season comes on. We are about 2 weeks away from the Plant City Strawberry Festival, which starts on March the 2nd. That is the official start of the produce season in Florida. You'll see pretty good volumes come out of there. And then about 4 weeks later, you'll see the Vidalia pack date for onions in Georgia. That will that's the starting line for the 2023 produce season when we start to see some national impact of rates. So, some good volumes, Ryan. We spent a lot more money as consumers. Truckload carriers benefited after a pretty lackluster period. But the important data point for people thinking about capacity is that Florida's weekly truckload volumes of produce, excluding flowers, are back on par with where they were this time last year after a very slow start because of Hurricane Ian. So, and of course, the other side of the country is we've had a lot more rain on the West Coast, which gives me a lot of optimism that growers will plant a lot more produce this year as opposed to fallowing hundreds of thousands of acres because of the drought. We could see a fairly good produce season out of the West Coast, which was lacking last year, and that could boost overall refrigerated carrier volumes this year. So that's a data point that I'm watching very carefully is the produce volumes out of the West Coast.
I'd also like to find out more about the vertical farming and where that's going.
Right.
And there's been an impact in that to see how much growth that is.
Yes.
I don't have much data on that, Jeff. I think it's a reasonable assumption that that's going to be a growing market, right? You would have. I wonder whether it's like trailer fuel economy technology that kind of comes and goes with the price of diesel. It's sexy and we're all going to do it when diesel's high, but when diesel drops, it's like, get rid of that stuff off the trailer. Yeah. So I wonder whether that's, but I think there is a sustained push towards more green technologies, more environmentally friendly, more cost efficient technology. So vertical farming makes complete sense to me. I mean, that's why you see so many greenhouses in Amsterdam when you fly into Schiphol, because that's where they want to control the light year round as opposed to importing all the way in from Kenya. So but that costs a lot of electricity, right, to run those lighthouses. So there's a.
But it also costs a lot of money for all these large farming equipment to be farming acres and acres and acres.
Yeah.
When you can go up, when you think about vertical farming and
right.
less space,
so
easier.
That's an interesting thing.
So
that's where robotics come in, right?
Yep.
It's where you see a lot of those autonomous tractors. We had on our show a couple of weeks ago, someone was talking about, I can't remember who it was, but for every 100, if you've got 1 million square acres of million square feet of warehouse, table stakes are a $40 million robotic installation. That's just table stakes for warehouses these days. Because of the labor, as our guest said yesterday, one of the challenges they've got with all of these new warehouses that are going up is labor. So that's why they're looking to automation and technology to offset the shortage of labor by making these massive warehouses more automated. But 40 million per million square foot was an interesting number. I thought that's a lot of money to invest in robotics.
Yeah, it's big. And I know I saw a clip at, was it Manifest, the one that was in Las Vegas? DHL was, they actually had their keynote speaking about automated warehouses for DHL itself. So I feel like, you talk about like labor, and a funny story coming back like to your auto parts and labor itself. I had somebody who worked as a logistics manager, and he quit his job during the pandemic so he can go do like oil changes or like, what is it? He's basically a mobile mechanic. And, and that's what he's like. I never have to go back to my job because I've used this to become like my main hustle and that side hustle from there. So we're seeing that with like the labor. We're seeing, I can go down to the plaza right now, which we have like 1 billion like food stores, and every single one of them has a now hiring sign, right? It's just the way of the world right now.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, but another thing to talk about automation, and I put a post out there not too long ago. I think it may have been on Nerf's post. But with automation, you can't put the cart before the horse, and I keep on saying that. It's like, okay, so you go full automation in a warehouse. Who loads the trailers? How does the guided vehicle picker have the ability to go into a trailer to stack boxes? Then what about the end user? What about lift gates and inside deliveries and white glove? There's all these other things that you have to think about when you go to automation. How are you going to do that when warehouses don't have docks and you need a lift gate? How is that going to operate? And that's a big part of the industry, guys. When you think about white glove delivery and inside.
Yeah, but that's yes, it's big, but it's not like I'm pretty assuming when they're going automated, they're not going to look at that first. They're not going to look at like the final mile or white glove service. They're going to look from dock automated to automated, right? Because
they're going to look at transfers from one warehouse to the other.
Exactly. Well, didn't Pepsi? I think Pepsi was a company that has that. They have like the automated truck that does like the transfers within the facility itself. And I think it's the way we got to embrace it. We're looking at news that there's McDonald's right now that are fully automated, right? Like
so many other things that it relates to, and what are they going to do about that if you're going to go full automation, AI? There's many different things, and I feel that we're far away from that. We're going in the right direction, but we're far from the full implementation of that.
It's interesting.
I was just pulling up some numbers here, talking about diesel. Diesel prices in Australia is $1.80 a litre for diesel, $6.85 a gallon. So that's why we put 4 trailers on the back.
All right, that's why we're not going to Australia for a while.
That's more than us for sure.
Yeah, it's expensive, but I think some of the road trains are running like 1 kilometre a litre in terms of fuel economy.
But when you can use intermodal, if your supply chain can support that, when you can drive 450 miles on a gallon of gas, that's what the thing, and you can fit 4 53-footers in a on a train. I mean, it's a no-brainer. You can afford the extra days of transit.
So on the podcast with Freightvine, Arias was talking about the other reason. I'd not thought about this, but to your point about excess inventories, he said one of the reasons that intermodal is favoured and sending volume through the Panama Canal to the Gulf Coast is shippers are loving the extra time it takes to get their goods in before they have to find a warehouse. So that was another data point that I thought was really interesting. So we've said that on the show before.
To deplete their inventory so they can take that inventory,
take it away,
it out a little bit, and they're not turning inventory as fast. Getting that material in there, and give them a little bit more time. So just another option. think about.
Something to think about here. As we're coming up to the end of amazing data day, anything you got coming up, Dean, for any kind of like speaking engagements or expos or anything like that?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. We've got a huge conference on next week we're speaking at. It's the ACT Research 68th conference. ACT Research are the premier company that tracks new truck and trailer orders and used truck prices. They've got a massive conference in Columbus, Indiana, the home of Cummins diesel engines. I'll be out there next week speaking. Our show next Tuesday is coming live from that location. One of the VPs from ACT Research, Tim DeNoyer, he's a really clever economist, and he'll be on our show next week talking about that. So, yeah, that's the big event coming up. I guess you guys have already got TIA's big event in April on your radar in Florida. They have their big conference coming up there. We'll be there in numbers. And, of course, Mid-America Truck Show is on at the end of March, where you'll see 4 seasons in a week. It'll rain, snow, sleet. There'll be everything going on in a week. I'll have my Peterbilt down there.
Almost made it.
Yeah. I'll be
For the awesome. So for those who don't know, Dean is on Dat IQ Live. It goes every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Him and his other co-host, Ken Damo, they have amazing guests, and definitely check it out. I always kind of check it out to get prepped for the show as well. So it's something that helps me as well. Mike, pleasure. Obviously, I've known you for a while. People, like as you kind of mentioned, anybody trying to get to 1 million GP, you're always willing. For anybody who doesn't know, I reach out to Mike quite a bit, and he's been somewhat of a mentor to me. So, Mike, how can people get a hold of you if they just want to talk shop or get a little bit of experience?
Yeah, they can get a hold of me at Wellington Motor Freight. They want to just go to, it's M Langstaff at wellingtonmotorfreight.com, or you can go to Ryan and he'll give it to you.
Awesome. Or just hit him up on LinkedIn. So with that being said, I want to thank everybody for coming out this morning. Thank the audience. It's a great day to basically use data to tell your story to your customers, prospects, even your carriers as well. So if you found value in this, please like, share it, subscribe to us, and then, give it to a colleague, someone who's kind of maybe they're looking for some data or doing different things with that. So catch a replay at 12 and 3 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And then, Jeff, take us out, brother.
Yeah, thanks, Mike and Dean. Once again, it was a great show today. Appreciate your insights, Dean, as always. Can't wait until
Very
next
interesting.
Thursday for another episode of Data Day. And with that said, everybody have a great day. Bodacious Cowboy out.
Okay. Take care.